In the previous video, we looked at why the composition API was created. Here, we're going to review when to use the composition API and learn about the setup method and reactive references. I want to emphasize that the composition API is just additive. It's a second way to write components. All the previous component syntax that you're familiar with in Vue 2, you can still use. It's completely valid. The composition API is just a more advanced optional syntax. If that's the case, then when should you use it? So here we have a component, and I might use the composition API if I really care about good TypeScript support. I also might use the API if I have a huge component and I want to organize it by feature. I also might use it if I have code that needs to be reused across multiple components. And lastly, if I'm simply working with a team that prefers this syntax over the regular syntax, that might be a good enough reason too. The code I'm about to show you is quite simple, and you might be wondering, why would I use the composition API in this case? And you might be right. My goal here was to make it as easy to learn as possible. Let's take a look at a component using the regular syntax. Here we're printing out the capacity of an event, and capacity is in the data option, making it reactive. In our browser, we see capacity 3. How would we write this using the composition API? Well, first we need to create that setup method. The setup method executes before components, props, data, methods, computer properties, and lifecycle methods. It also does not have access to this, so our code inside here is going to look different. The setup method also has two optional arguments. The first is props, which is reactive and can be watched. So let me show you what that might look like. Here you can see I have a prop, which is name, and then I declare setup with the props argument. If I wanted to watch this prop for changes, I could import watch from Vue, then I could log out to the console whenever it changes. The optional second argument for setup is context. We use context to access properties that we'd previously access with this. Here are the different properties that it gives us access to. Now back to our example. Here we need to import ref from Vue and then declare capacity as a constant, which equals ref3. The ref function creates a reactive reference. This wraps our primitive in an object, allowing us to track changes. Previously, we were using data, and data was wrapping our primitives in an object for us. Now we're creating a reactive reference, which is an object that wraps our primitive, which in this case is 3. As a side note, with the composition API and the way Vue 3 does reactivity, we can now declare reactive objects that aren't associated with the component, which is quite powerful. Lastly, our setup method needs to return anything that needs to get accessed from the template. So in this case, it's capacity. You might initially think this is more verbose, but it also makes our component more maintainable, since we can control what gets exposed in our template, and we can more easily trace where a property is defined. In our browser, everything is working. It's worth mentioning that this composition API syntax you can use in a Vue 2 app by using this plugin for Vue 2. You'll want to follow the installation options on the GitHub page, and then instead of importing from Vue, you instead import from Vue/composition API. This is how I tested all the code I'm showing you.